Time for a red wave. I've always fancied myself as a libertarian, or as a middle-of-the-roader, or as someone who voted for the best candidate, despite the fact that I was a fourth-generation raised Republican. I was a Barry Goldwater 1964 in high school proponent. I had even a gold sweatshirt said AUH2O, Barry Goldwater. So even when my mother was a national conventional delegate, she and I talked about the positive aspects of both parties and both sets of candidates, and sometimes she and I disagreed, most notably about George W. Bush, wherein she was obviously in support of him, and I had to tell her what an awful, mean, nasty, duplicitous, lying piece of neocon crap he was. And my mother loved me anyway. Isn't that cool? So, what does it take to have a red wave? And let me use another term which also fits into the process, and that is run the table. Run the table is a term in pool where you get access to the table. You're the person that gets to be shooting pool, and you keep hitting every one. You put a ball in the pocket every time you shoot, and you never give the other guy a chance to get back on the table. So that's called run the table. Aaron Rodgers used it as a mantra, I think, a couple years ago when he was trying to reestablish the Green Bay Packers as a football team. So of those of you who don't care about pool or football, let's run through the process. So I want you to take a look at and begin to follow, if you will, if you're interested, realclearpolitics.com. It's REALCLEAR politics, POLITICS.com, and it has all the stuff on the latest polls. And what it is showing is that as I'm watching the Senate, there are a couple things I'm watching. The first one is I'm watching, and I find this absolutely fascinating. I mean, it is just a killer that we've got Democrats and liberal MSM mainstream media saying, well, Donald Trump has a negative, favorable, unfavorable. Yes, he does. Its current one is he's down about 13%, 41 to 54. What they don't say is, and I find this absolutely fabulous, is that Nancy Pelosi is down almost 25%. Chuck Schumer is down almost 14%. Mitch McConnell is down 24%. And Paul Ryan is down almost 22%. So everybody's more negative than Trump, right? Anybody in the national political realm is more negative than Trump. So it is no longer about who's the most popular guy, it's who is the least unpopular guy. So that's number one. Number two, what has been happening over the last 3 or 4 weeks since the Kavanaugh thing came up is that there has been a consistent and growing shift among respondents to polls, and it is obvious in the Senate. The Senate is large. The Senate that's up, 33 or 34 senators run each year, each election, each 2 years, to replace the previous senators. And this time, there are many more Democrats running than there are Republicans. In any normal year, not in a midterm election year and not with a Republican incumbent, the Democrats would probably lose 10 or 15 seats. In this case, the question is, can they gain? And in a midterm election with a Republican incumbent, the Democrats almost always gain. In a midterm election with a Democrat, the Republicans almost always gain, and that's only not happened a couple of times. So what's it going to take to have a red wave? And number two, what is it going to take to run the table? So let's talk about what's obvious. The obvious first all is that you've got Wyoming with Barrasso, the incumbent, Nebraska with Deb Fisher, the incumbent, Mississippi with Roger Wicker, the incumbent, and Mississippi the second with Cindy Hyde-Smith, the incumbent, probably all safe seats for Republicans. And you've got Mitt Romney, what is his name, Willard? Willard Mitt Romney, running to replace Hatch, a sure win, a Mormon in a Mormon state, in a Republican, heavily Republican state, replacing a popular Republican senator with a popular national figure, Romney. So then you have leaning states, states that are starting to tilt or that have begun to tilt even over the last couple of weeks. Ted Cruz, who was up only a couple percent over his opponent, the Republican incumbent senator from Texas, is now up by 7%. In Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn is looking to replace Bob Corker, and she is now up by 5.5% over her opponent. And in North Dakota, which would be a flip, Heitkamp, the incumbent, I think it was Heidi Heitkamp, is now down 8.7% against a Republican challenger, Kevin Cramer. So that's part of the run the table, right? Those are the 8 easiest ones. And then you've got the neutral states, which are all out floating in the weather, and which Real Clear Politics says some of them go one way, some go the other. Let me go through them. So Florida, you've got incumbent Bill Nelson against Governor Rick Scott running for the Senate, and Nelson is ahead still by 2.5%, but it's really close. In Indiana, you've got Donnelly, the Democrat, up by 2% over Braun, the Republican, and there's a Brenton guy named a Libertarian, but it's a 2.5% race. And where you have a strong third party, oftentimes you'll get a bleed. If the race is really close, you'll get a bleed out from the third party to the challenger if there is some agreement between the challenger and the third party guy. Third, you have Missouri, which is Claire McCaskill, who is the incumbent, and Josh Hawley, the Republican, who's actually up by 0.5%, almost 0.5%. You've got Nevada, Dean Heller, the Republican incumbent, now up by 2% over Jackie Rosen. And in Arizona, well, I'll talk about that one in a minute. Montana's the next one's up. John Tester, who's the incumbent, and I've met John. I kind of like him. I really do. He's a farmer. He's a great big guy. He's a flat top. He worked to get my aunt posthumously a gold medal, a congressional gold medal for having been Women's Air Corps in World War II. And so he and I actually did the presentation. But in the red state run-up for a red wave, for a run the table, we need to teach these folks that they cannot have rogue elements challenging people. What is it Michelle Obama said? When they go low, we go high. And Holder says, when they go low, we kick them while they're down. And you think that's just hyperbole. No, it's not. That's what they believe. That's where they are right now. So the stuff that went on in Kavanaugh, there is no way around it. It was kick them while they're low, kick them while they're high, kick them anywhere you can. And John Tester came in on that and made some awful statements about Kavanaugh, which were untrue. So it's time to say to these folks, hey, look, we're going to make an example of you, and I will tell you in a minute why I think that works. So finally, you've got Arizona to replace Jeff Flaky Snowflake Flake, who could not face off a couple of screaming women in an elevator. Couldn't even look them in the eye. I mean, what kind of politician is it that can't step forward and say, no, I have integrity, and you're just challenging me in a really, really unkind, unsafe, and dangerous sort of way. So you've got Kirsten Sinema, who sounds like she ought to be selling cinnamon rolls, right? Who is actually running a very strong case, a Democrat running against Martha McSally to replace Jeff Flake. And she was in the lead. Well, it's now flipped, finally. Martha McSally, who is an Air Force combat pilot who has done 100 missions, running as the Republican against Kirsten Sinema, a liberal Democratic congresswoman who has brags about having 100 pairs of shoes while Martha McSally has done 100 combat missions. Who do you want to represent you? So Kirsten Sinema also has a few bones in her closet. One of them is that when she was campaigning, I think in Texas, she said, you know, we think of states as the laboratories for democracy, and Arizona is the meth lab for democracy. Her own state. I was raised there. They're crazy, she says. She compared death in the desert of Iraq with combat veterans fighting, not a good war, but a war nonetheless, fighting as part of our American forces. She compared that equally with illegals crossing the border and dying in the deserts in Arizona. I don't like people dying in the deserts anywhere. I don't like people dying anywhere. I certainly don't want to, it hurts me to see people crossing the border and then being at risk either by MS-13 or whatever else, but comparing those on an even basis, people who are illegally entering the country to people who are wearing the military uniforms of the United States and that are killed in action, comparing those two equally, I think is a travesty of any kind. So it looks like the red wave is moving Martha McSally up over the top of Kirsten Sinema. And so there's that. Now, there's the next one, and there are the challenges. Places in which the Democrats are clearly in the lead, but there is a shift, and that shift you can see on Real Clear Politics. One is Michigan with Debbie Stabenow, still up over 9% over a Republican challenger, a business person, a veteran, a Republican, a black guy, a very articulate man who has gone from about 25 or 30 points down in Michigan to 9 points down with 20 odd days left. You've got the incumbent in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, the Democrat, who is the lone Democratic vote for Kavanaugh. Well, why did he do that? Well, because Trump won West Virginia by 40 points, and if he voted against him, he was going to lose. He's now in an old poll, which is about a month old almost, three weeks old, which is a highly fluid situation. A guy named Patrick Morrissey that's running, Manchin is still 9.4% above Morrissey, but I guarantee you that's not the case. And the question then is, do the Democrats lose favor? Democrats apparently have pulled funding from Joe Manchin because he didn't do what he was told. If that's the case, Morrissey has a shot coming in, a better shot, a more financially based shot. You've got New Jersey with Robert Menendez, the guy who had corruption charges filed against him and ended up in a hung jury. There were also other charges against him. He has been besmirched. New Jersey is one of the few places, maybe I'm not going to say any other states, where you could elect a guy who has been logically, rationally charged with corruption, and he wins anyway. You know, that would work in Washington, D.C. Remember, we had Marion Barry, a guy who actually sounds like something to eat with your ice cream, who was corrupt and won, but that's about the only place it works. And he leads a guy named Bob Huggan, who's a Republican, by 7%, but that's down from 20%, and it's in shooting range. Then you've got Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin is the incumbent Democrat, and she's over Leah Vukmir, I don't know how to say it, by 10%. That's a long shot, but possible. Minnesota, Tina Smith is the incumbent Democrat, and she leads Karen Housley by 9.7%. But remember, Minnesota, out of almost 3 million voters, Trump lost by less than 45,000 votes. So it is a big possibility. So if you ran the table, here's the deal. You ran the table, you shoot the 5 easy balls, you get Wyoming, Utah, Nebraska, and 2 Mississippis. There you go. Clink, 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 clink. Then you go for Texas and Tennessee and North Dakota, clink, clink, clink. And then you shoot for the ones that don't require serious banking, Florida, Indiana, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, and Arizona. And then you got to shoot the double bankers, the hard shots. And that would be Michigan, West Virginia, New Jersey, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But I'm telling you, this thing could work that way, and it could roll. And what it takes is, for those of you who are watching, go for it. Go in these states where there is a place to run the poll, run the table. It's time to look at that red wave and to push the red wave and to take in all seriousness the opportunity to make it happen. And then, again, the moderate in me, the middle of the roader, the person who has voted for Democrats in the past, God forgive me, Mom, God forgive me, but to down ballot vote Republican. Governor, Congress, state stuff. And why do we do that? Well, there's 2 reasons. Number one, for these national votes, and this is both in the Senate and in the House, if you vote for Democrats this time, you are voting for chaos, mayhem. You've got 4 or 5 or 6 committees in the House of Representatives and 2 or 3 in the Senate who are going to, on an ongoing basis, go for impeachment, go for removal, go after Kavanaugh, go after Trump, look at some hotel that he might have tried to build in Moscow. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and do nothing productively with this country for the next 2 years, trying to beat up on him to gain some traction, either for impeachment or to flip him in 2 years. That's all that's going to happen. And the second issue about it is that you've got, and this is an issue that both Republicans, Independents, as well as Democrats need to look at, and that is, this is the first time ever we have had absolute chaos espoused by a party, where they have said, if a person shows up at a restaurant, run him out. If a person shows up at a play, chastise him, publicly humiliate him, lecture him, the Vice President of the United States at a Manhattan a play at Hamilton, to do that, that's not a democratic process. That's not a republic which says we have honorable differences, we share our differences, we work within our differences, and we're all Americans. That's not what that is. It is Hillary Clinton calling anybody who doesn't agree with her deplorables. And it is time for the deplorables, everybody that's moderately deplorable, people that just are occasionally deplorable, it's time for them to say, no, listen, you cannot do this in a republic. You cannot treat people this way. You cannot have a democracy that functions where half the people in the country are treated as reprobates, as people who have no right to be here, who have no right to speak. And finally, there's the governor candidate in Georgia that is espousing in favor of illegals, that is undocumented workers, voting in the gubernatorial election in Georgia. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? I mean, only Obama did that, right? Well, go ahead and vote, it's okay. So, run the table. Time for the red wave. Teach the Democrats this time to come back to the party, to come back to the middle, to be responsible citizens, and to respect all of us. And when you've done that, when we've done that, when we have taught them a lesson, they can regroup. They can pitch out the bad actors. I've got another set of comments about people, so-called progressives, looking at the Constitution and how they treat the Constitution and what they say about it and how absolutely unimaginable it is that they look at our Constitution this way, but they do. And that's another piece of it. So, red wave, run the table, kick ass, and take names. Vote, 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 vote. Count on voting working this time. I think if there's any reason why Trump won, it is because they revalidated and re-machined the voting machines to make them actually work. I actually believe that that's what happened. It may not have happened in every place. It certainly didn't happen in California, but it may have happened in a majority of the states. And if there's anything that's gone on in the last 2 years that Trump has done behind the scenes, it better damn well be that they fixed a lot of the voting machine fraud. If that's the case, our vote counts. Let's make it work. Let's try it. Let's give it good faith. Red wave, run the table, kick ass, take names. Thanks. If you like it, thumbs up.